Анто.
Сначала тебя представь.
Мэй. Нихао.
Здравствуйте, мы рады приветствовать.
Hello, we are really welcome everyone who decided to attend our Meet the Poet event. Today we have also two representatives of two different peoples in the Russian Far East, of the Koryaks and of the Chukchis. That's why all the Chukot will sort of talk about the Chukchi and the Koryak literature. Galina Kharyutkina will represent the Koryak literature. She is also the author of books on Koryak folklore, author of songs and poems in Koryak. She also was awarded by Stebnitsky and Tapanan prizes. As for the Chukotka, it will be represented by two people, by Tatьяна and Samira Asadova. They are both Chukchi members, and Tatьяна is also a translator of Chukchi, and Samira is a member of the Russian Union of Writers and also was awarded by Юрия Рытхэу International Literary Competition Award. And we will start with the Koryak literature. Galina will make a short overview, also talk about what she created. Once again, hello. Today I would like to tell you about the Koryaks, about the literature of the Koryaks. The Koryaks amount to 9,933, and we have just a little bit more than 7,000 Koryaks here in Kamchatka. And here in the Koryak districts, where we have around 6,500 Koryaks. This people is actually not a really huge in count, but we are certainly rich in our creation. Probably you already heard about the Koryak artist Kirill Kilpalin, because Kirill is not only an artist, he is also a writer. I will also tell you a little bit about him. And the first book about Stepan Krasheninnikov, which is called Description of the Kamchatka Land. That was the first time when the people started hearing about the Koryaks. As for the Koryak literature, here we have two series books. These are the fairy tales and the myths of peoples in Chukotka and Kamchatka that was published in 1960s in the Soviet Union. And then we also got a book by Ozhigov, which is called The Koryak Literature. And here we have a very detailed description, an overview of the Koryak literature. And today I would like to tell you one more thing. The first information, the first literature about the Koryaks was in Latin, like Vladimir Bogorostan, who used also to write about the Koryaks and the Chukots. And Vladimir Bogorostan also used to write about the Koryaks. And there was a significant contribution made by Sergei Stebnitsky. He also wrote more about the Koryaks, about the spiritual culture. In 1960s, Innocenty Vdovin had a lot of information and published it about the Koryaks. When our Koryak literature has begun, it is quite an interesting fact that the Koryak literature appeared to us. It was actually in 1920s when actually people started getting educated and going to school in our district. And in 1933, we got the first written books in Koryaks, which were written by the students of the military school in Kamenskoye. Here, young people wrote their 33 stories and novels. They were writing about the past of their parents. They were writing about the past of their villages, and certainly they were writing about the folklore materials. The first book was actually written by hand, and the second one was published and also was illustrated with the pictures provided by the authors. Later on, when the writing was widely introduced into the Koryak school, we started getting our other writers who were able to write in the Koryak. Most of these writers were those who used to have Sergei Stebnitsky as a teacher, because he was the one who in 1927-28 started teaching children the Koryak written language, and he was also searching and collecting different folklore, different local stories. And when he went away, he also tried to attract those children who used to teach at school in order to make translators and writers out of them. When these young guys came to Leningrad, to St. Petersburg, so they started their creative career. It was quite difficult at that moment that we had used to have 9 dialects in Koryak, and the children who came to Leningrad, they were not only from the school where Sergei was a teacher, they were also from other schools, and they used to speak other dialects and they used to dispute. And when Keksaki Kerken, who came from Kamchatka, he started thinking that he actually needed to write down all the correct words he knew. And when he was also writing down all these words, he actually understood that it was possible to write a book. And he actually wrote the first novel. And he actually described in this novel the life of his own father. And he not only described, and now he actually tried to show the spiritual and feelings of the main character and of all other people who surrounded the main character. And this is actually the first real book of the Koryak literature, and he is a Koryak, a nation. He was a young man, and he was born in 1918. And this young gentleman was so serious, and then he started writing the second novel, and this second novel was called The Last Battle. The first one was actually The Deer Boy. And this second one, which was The Last Battle, was about the national wars between the Koryaks and the Chukots, and this actually novel is considered to be the classical one in the Koryak land literature, because here if you actually read the battle of the Koryaks and the Chukots, you can certainly also imagine you battle in Borodino, because we can also see the impact of this Koryak, the war, and it really becomes really strong. And do you really think it is actually something what is a real classical novel in the Koryak literature? Then he wrote another novel which is called more lyrical one. He actually described a young life of a young man, actually all his emotions he wrote about his family. However, he really managed to describe the beauty of the surrounding world, about the rivers flowing, about the forest growing and greening, and this nature description helps also to show the inner part of a young man. And Kitsaki Ketten was a young man who used to write these books, and at the same time we also had another writer, Ivan Barannikov, and Ivan Barannikov was from another group of the Koryak. He was closer to the mammalians, and these mammalians used to work on the shore, and they were usually fishing. So he actually collected and described fairy tales told by his parents. And these fairy tales are really very interesting, and they usually get not only the current status of nature, but you can also find out of these fairy tales how diverse, how beautiful that the life of another man is, what these people think, what they do traditionally. And Kitsaki Ketten and Ivan Barannikov also had another writer, Leo Zhukov. Leo Zhukov, he was also from a third group of the Koryaks, and he wrote a very interesting novel, which is called Notaime. This is the name of the main character, because this Notaime is an epic Koryak warrior, and he also described the first conflicts between Koryaks and other peoples, and he also described the situation where the Koryaks saw a rifle for the first, or a gun for the first time, and those who had these guns, they called gunmen, because the gunmen were those who used to fire from guns, and it was quite interesting and important for the Koryak people at that time. I described the 1930s, 1940s. In 1950s, the school started having the Koryak language as a must subject, and the young people were able actually to get not only the Russian but all the Koryak writing. So we got many young people who started translating the classic books. For example, Alexander Yaitkan, who started in 1940s at the Zhdanov University of Leningrad. He was attending the Faculty of History, and at the same time, he also worked quite significantly in translating the classic Russian literature into the Koryak. He translated Tolstoy, Pushkin, Chekhov. Besides this translation work, he also were writing novels and short stories about the past. And he was really pretty well familiar with the Koryak past, because after the school he used to work in the deer production farm, and then he actually was able to be admitted at the university in Leningrad. He got a scholarship in order to finance his study there, and he was one of the first authors on the Koryak textbooks. And he also included his own short stories in this textbook. And I just would like to give you a couple of examples how clear and very interesting and exact he also tells the guys about the birds. Many birds used to fly to the southwards in fall, and our bird stays with us, and she is not hungry. This partridge is not hungry because she gets a lot of berries, a lot of roots to eat, and she is also as a partridge to get out this food out of the snow, and she also can escape in the snow when she sees enemies. This is the Russian translation, and this translation was done by the writer and co-author writer of many books, and he used to work with Innocenty, and Innocenty also collected a lot of folklore material in Koryak. He used to work in a Luther land. That's why he managed to collect many fairy tales written in the dialect of Kaluta Koryak. And the fairy tales you write, what dialect, what variety of the correct language do you use to write your fairy tales? I also decided that I have to write in my own language. And why? Because I'm currently a representative of those who didn't study the correct language in my childhood, and I also didn't learn the correct language when I was attending the teaching faculty of teachers. And after 1950s, the schools stopped teaching Koryak, and we didn't have enough material. So in that time, I decided I have to write in Koryak. In the beginning, I only had to really very simple things. Kava was walking in the forest and found a very sweet berry. This is the shortest scripture translation of what was said in Koryak. And the bear can also provide me a lot of berries. That is well known. Children play. And I also wanted actually to help other people, first of all, children, to understand our Koryak, because our children, they really like to sing and to dance. And I also wrote a song for my children. We have a clear water, and we can also wash our hands and face. That's how it is. That's how it is. I used to write this kind of songs for children, and they're also quite normal for me to start translating. And I started not only translating, but because I was pretty worried about that our children should be able not only to sing and to dance, because I really wanted our children to know about our life of the past, and the fairy tales is a good reflection of our material and spiritual culture. That's why I actually made this collection on Koryak fairy tales. This is actually collection number 1. These are fairy tales from 1930s, 1940s, based on the material collected by Sergei Stebnitsky. He really managed to collect a lot of fairy tales for the Koryak people. The next one, I also managed to create the second collection book. These are the fairy tales collected by a linguist, Novshikov, and I translated these fairy tales. In the 1950s, 1960s, we also had another Koryak writer and teacher, I know a lot of. He also wrote his own fairy tales, and I would like to also show you and to say that all these fairy tales are illustrated by his granddaughter, Anastasia. This fairy tale is from 1950s, 1960s, and I also managed to translate the fairy tales from Chaftuvan and Namalan, collected in 1950s, 1960s. Now you were able to see how beautiful these books are. And this particular books were actually illustrated by Pavel Etienne, and he used to draw in a very good way, and he was able to give and to show the peculiarities of the Koryaks. As for the poems, songs, many of them are collected in this book which I wrote. I also included my fairy tales in the book which is called Fairy Tales of Kamchatka. And here you can certainly not only read but also listen to the fairy tales. And I would like to say that the current status of the Koryak literature is not really down, it is really flourishing. We have Yuri Alotov. He writes in both in Russian and English and Koryak, and he writes less in Koryak, but I'm absolutely sure that he will keep writing in Koryak more because he speaks this language, and he doesn't write about the past, he writes about the current time, and they really show a deep philosophy. I also would like to call you those who are currently writing. For example, we had Innokenty Yeganov as a writer. He is actually from the Lesnoy village, and he is really a very bright man. Unfortunately, he died, and he really spent a very, very short life and died before he turned 30. However, his poems and his short stories are really very bright, and you can also read what he writes about the birds.
Reatek novoy angang tatek, pchinga angang tapil, chivir, 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 chivor, tenatek to temelantak, chivir, chivir, chivor, tenmel амалка. Клетку открыли, птичка полетела.
We opened the cage, and a bird started flying and started singing a bird song. Chivir, chivor. It is really good to fly and sing. I really enjoy singing. And these poems are for children, and also for children in order to learn their own native language. And now in the 21st century, we also got another book of these military students writing in their native languages. We do have this contest in native languages, and also for the Koryak, Tilmani, and Evenkim, and the Koryaks are pretty active here. We had around 70 participants in this contest, starting from the school age down to the really elder people. I also remember a short story by one of the home. And Galina, as we heard out of the Koryak literature, the Koryak literature is still in its process. It is existing. We have authors It is quite difficult to explain everything within 30 minutes. It's just impossible. That's why we have to give the floor to Tatiana and Samira Asada from Chukotka, and we'd like to thank Galina. It was a really very, very interesting. Or now we can also think to how it goes.
Давай. Привет Тунгутури. Меня зовут Самира Асадова. Я молодой чукотский
My name is
писатель.
Samira Asadova. I'm a young Chukotka writer. Here is my mother, Tatyana Asadova. She is a translator of my text into the Chukot language.
Чукотской культуры, чукотского языка.
She's also a connoisseur of the Chukot language, and she is also a news anchor in Chukot. I saw the book
Если говорить о
Chukotka in Fables.
здесь также есть QR-код, по которому можно перейти.
It also contains a QR code. You can point your camera at this QR code to listening to stories in both the Chukot language and Eskimo language.
Первая книга сказки бабушки Темнекиной вышла у меня
The
в
Ternek
2010 году.
Grandmother's Tales was released in 2010 when I was a school
И вот нам получилось
girl
собрать вот
in the 10th grade.
легенды
So we were able to bring together
и
tales and legends told by our grandmothers. So
книга по
this is how this book was released.
России Кончаланского Чаучу вышла уже в
The second
2012
book
году.
was released in 2012.
И позже я участвовала в благотворительном конкурсе
Later on, I took part in a charitable
для
competition
детей,
for the
отбирающих
edition
пересадку органов. Счастье
of
есть.
a book
Конкурс
dedicated to
проводился
children
15
waiting for
15 годы.
a donor transplant.
Уже только
This is 2017, but the book was released
в 2020 году.
and published as late as
Ну и, собственно
2020, 2 years ago.
в современной литературе это вот
Regarding
они
contemporary literature, what else do we have? These are books in Russian, Chukot, Eskimo languages. They're available in print today in these languages.
фестивалей.
There are quite a lot of festivals dedicated to the conservation of the language. There are a lot of books in print, so the books are available. There is a huge effort put forward. So this is the contemporary Chukotka fairy tales. This is in the wake of the Юрия Рытхэу's competition, and the entrants provided their inputs to build this book of fairy tales. This spans several age groups, from the very youngest to adults. There are even some pieces in Eskimo, in the Eskimo language. Regarding other contemporary pieces, Running in the Tundra by Mikhail Sverlov. These are the remembrances of an Eskimo radio journalist. Tales also taught us the good things. It is available in Russian and Eskimo. Of course, there are also some young authors and experienced ones. We have prominent authors, and the very first professional writer is Yuri Rытkheu, a Chukot classic author. His works were translated into English, French. His famous works include Sleep at instead of a mist, werewolves, marks, and the Chukchi people are proud of this writer. So he is our role model. Even though we discovered he existed quite recently, how did our literature evolve? How did it all start? Before the revolution, we didn't have any writing, just like the Koryak people. They didn't have any alphabet either. The first version was in Latin by Bogoraz. The first alphabet was the Latin one. It was followed by the Cyrillic alphabet. The Chukot language is taught, and it's an optional, it's a facultative. Since this is not a state language, we normally speak this language at home, and unfortunately, this is a language on the verge of extinction. We still have contemporary writers Ivan Vasilievich Mruya passed away recently. His works include the following ones: Moralkot and others. They were also translated into French. Rytkheu does quite a lot for the conservation of our mother tongue, our native language. This is methodology books, vocabularies, and courses in Chukot. Unfortunately, the only textbooks we have date back to the Soviet times, the ones released in the Soviet Union. These intended for those with a good command of the Chukot language, like me. At present, unfortunately, we need books designed for foreigners, as if we were foreigners studying the language. These are pieces like, in this book, these are short stories and tales. Tales and fairy tales are always captivating as you read them. And some of these tales were told to my brothers by my mother. I was born in a tundra region myself, and I worked and lived in a tundra region for a long time. When I got married, Azerbaijani man, I brought him to tundra, to our settlement. And we had 4 sons. Actually, 4 kids, 3 boys and 1 girl. This is her. 2 of them were twins, Samira and Samira. When they had to start schooling, we had to move to a larger location, larger city. My mother, since working in the tundra region is very hard, it's a very harsh environment, and you have very little time, she took care of our kids, mine and Redvan's. And according to our tradition, tales and fairy tales are supposed to be short ones. So she would read some role model tales, like didactic tales. And the beliefs popular with our Konchalan tundra became part of this book. Here it is. Of course, we're not much of classic writers. Samira put down in writing what she heard from grandmother And from tales told by headsmen. Back in the Soviet times, when the collectivization started, the rich deer breeders took their herds away to protect them from collectivization. By the way, in the Konchalan tundra, we had some rich people from the Koryak tundra who had taken their herds one day to our location for them to graze. We would call them Tanyak. By the way, they have their own beliefs, their own legends, their own stories. There are plenty of family plans, and all the herdsmen, all the deer farmers shared their legends and tales, their mythology, shared with them by their ancestors, by their grandfathers and grandmothers. And here how this book was released. Well, quail is a totem animal for one of the groups. Others have a different totem animal. Actually, killer whale is their killer whales is their totem animal, power animal. And these are the various family groups present in our Konchalan tundra. This area, the tundra, used to be a land of the Eskimo deer farmers. There are Eskimo people who call themselves Ivana, and there are other Eskimos who have a different name, Unil. This is the Chapli, Eskimo people. And these tales, fairy tales, and stories, Samira took them and interpreted them in a way for the young people to be able to actually understand what these legends and tales are all about. Because the original version told by grandmother, told by the elderly deer farmers, these would be very difficult to comprehend for the young generations brought up with Disney cartoons. So she wrote it down and I translated them. Since the literal language belonged to the coastal groups, I translate text for television into my spoken dialect for the vast majority of the Chukchi people who watch television or read these books can understand what it's all about. On another note, and this is a grassroots initiative. The classical version is not well understood by us because we recently moved from the tundra regions ourselves. I worked for a long time as a teacher, so did Samira. She worked as a teacher as well, of her native language, of the mother tongue. In the Konchalan village area, normally our singing does not involve any words, any lyrics. This means I'm going to take my voice coming from the very heart of mine, from my soul. And singing is normally vocalized and there is no lyrics. There are no lyrics. We have proverbs as follows. If you sit constantly, you will never become rich.
Recording in progress.
Всех успехов не только Самире и Татьяне Ивановне, также Галине Николаевне, потому что у всех работа с родным языком все еще продолжается, потому что, несмотря на то, что язык, конечно, находится на очень тяжелой стадии, практически на грани исчезновения, при этом есть люди, которых это заботит.
Virtually on the verge of becoming extinct. And realize since this is an ethnic minority, the literature has the same scope, but it has no bearing on the